Hey guys, today I'm not coming at you with the usual Reddit stories, but with something different. What's known as Soviet creepypasta. This is new territory for me, so after you watch the video, please leave me your thoughts in the comments. These aren't your typical horror stories. They're more like mysteries, with that certain vibe that makes you pay attention to every detail. I don't want to spoil anything. Better to just listen and judge for yourself whether this is your thing or not. And before we start, you know the drill. Subscribe to the channel. With that said, get comfortable and let's begin. This story came to me second-hand, third-hand, and 10th-hand, so I can't vouch for its authenticity. It has all the markings of a traveler's legend, but who knows? It could have really happened. It was the early 1960s when a geological survey team ventured into the Ural Mountains, or maybe Siberia. The details were never clear. They were searching for something, probably gold or diamonds, because on top of the geologists, there was a security agent traveling with the group. They also had a local guide, someone who knew the area well. The team, with several pack animals for the heavy loads, was moving on foot. One day, the expedition came across an abandoned village, just a handful of houses blackened by time. The guide explained that this had been an old believer settlement, which, according to rumors, had been left behind recently because the place had gone bad. They said an unclean spirit from the nearby forest had driven them out. The guide didn't know exactly what the former residents had meant. In that era of militant atheism, the story only sparked laughter. Crazy religious folk. Outcasts who hadn't even heard about the war. Anyway, they wanted to camp in the village, but a deliberately blocked well changed their plans. Without water, there was no camp. So they moved on to a stream a couple of kilometers away, in the forest. They set up camp in a clearing next to a barely visible path leading to the water. There were 2 women in the expedition, the cooks. While the men pitched tents and gathered firewood, the women went back and forth to the stream. Night fell, they had dinner, but the cook's work wasn't done. There were dishes to wash and breakfast to prep. It wasn't late yet. The sun hadn't fully set. One of the women was by the stream washing the dishes. The other was going back and forth carrying more utensils and collecting water. There must have been quite a few people in the expedition. At some point, the second woman returns to the stream with more dishes and doesn't find her companion. Well, she must have stepped away for a moment, she thinks. She waits, calls out, but no one answers. Alarm. She brings the men. They search the forest, shout her name, but nothing. Near the stream, they find the missing woman's headscarf. The guide, an experienced hunter, examines the area and points out tracks leading into the forest. They were strange, twisted, like someone walking with their feet turned outward. Only the mark of a deformed pinky toe was distinguishable. They weren't bear tracks, nor human. The guide had never seen anything like it. There were no signs of blood, no struggle, no drag marks, no footprints from the woman's footwear either. Something had carried the woman away in its arms. This was serious. They had to follow the trail, but night was falling. They armed themselves, grabbed dynamo flashlights, the old-school kind you had to crank with your hand, and ventured into the forest. But the flickering light wasn't enough. They lost the trail and had to return to camp to wait for dawn. They posted armed guards, but nobody could sleep. Helplessness weighed on them. They patrolled the edge of the forest in armed groups, calling out to the missing woman, but the forest offered no reply. They made it as far as the abandoned village and came back to camp, gathering around the campfire. Suddenly, the guide froze, listening. Everyone fell silent. The guide crept forward toward the stream path. Behind him, gun in hand, was the security agent. The flashlight beam illuminated the body of the missing woman, lying in the middle of the path. She was dead. Her purplish face still held an expression of sudden terror, her mouth slightly open, her pupils hidden beneath her eyelids. She had several dark lines on her cheeks and forehead, as if someone had rubbed them with a dirty finger. Her clothes were torn, but intact. The team doctor examined the body and found no wounds. He ruled it death by cardiac arrest. A nightmare. Someone had died on a peaceful expedition. Who was responsible? What was lurking in the forest? And strangest of all, why was the body brought back? There were no bite marks, so it wasn't an animal. It had been carried back, but the tracks weren't human. What kind of sorcery was this? Maybe the old believers had been right. The guide just shrugged. Even he had never heard of anything like it. In the morning, they would radio headquarters and request a helicopter. Dawn came. They had a quick breakfast. Some of the men, along with the guide and the agent, resumed the search for tracks. The other cook, accompanied by armed men, went to the stream to wash the dishes. As they were scrubbing, they kept looking around nervously. Suddenly, the woman saw something. From the underbrush, a face was staring intently at her. She screamed, pointing. The creature vanished instantly, but one of the escorts, a war veteran, reacted quickly and fired into the bushes. A groan, then silence. Cautiously, weapons raised, they pushed through the brush and found a goblin-like figure lying on the ground. It was naked, filthy, almost black. Arms and legs contorted, fingers twisted, claws curved. Matted hair, a huge flat nose. Half its face and chest were covered in hair. The rest of the expedition members arrived. The doctor examined the creature and concluded that, after all, it was human. A man with congenital deformities, completely feral. A theory emerged. Perhaps this monster had lived near the old Believer settlement for a reason. Maybe a local woman, after an incestuous pregnancy, fled to the forest to give birth. Upon seeing her child, she couldn't kill him. Maybe her faith prevented it, or she thought it was divine punishment for her sins. She stayed with him in the forest until she died. The creature, now an adult, retained the instinctive memory of maternal warmth and approached the village, frightening the superstitious women. The cook, with her weak heart, died of fright. But the creature didn't understand and carried her into the forest. When he realized she was dead, he brought her back. Or maybe that's not how it happened. Who knows? In March 2003, I was conducting an asset appraisal for a company in liquidation at the Nizhny Tagil metallurgical plant. The company, Tagil Auto Remont, specialized in heavy vehicle repair. It had assets worth, well, a lot, including real estate and all kinds of vehicles. To assess the condition of the latter, I hired an expert mechanic, Sergei Ivanovich. An excellent guy, responsible, didn't drink, and was a top-notch technician. He was in his early 50s at the time. We agreed to meet on the weekend at the plant. It worked well for me because I was working in another city. Access to the plant was tricky. You had to walk 40 minutes from the main entrance, unless you used the old underground tunnel, which cut the trip in half, but you had to find the right exit because it was easy to get lost in that maze. The tunnel was narrow, with unpainted walls, deep puddles, and perpetual gloom. The light bulbs, when they worked, hung every few meters. Some areas were completely dark. Better bring a flashlight. We agreed to meet directly at the workshop, so each of us would make our own way there. I arrived without issues, though I had to go around 2 or 3 times before finding the staircase exit. At the workshop, with the client's representative, I began inspecting the property. An hour passed, then 2. I was almost done with my tasks, and the mechanic still hadn't shown up. Very strange. Sergei Ivanovich was punctual as a Swiss watch. We'd spoken on the landline that morning. Cell phones weren't that common then, and he didn't have one. I couldn't call him to find out what was going on. Just as I was starting to worry, he showed up. He came running in, disheveled, dazed. But there was no time for explanations. We were already way behind. We got to work inspecting the machinery. When we finished, in the office over tea, Sergei Ivanovich told me why he'd been so late. He'd arrived at the entrance an hour early to walk at a leisurely pace. He went down into the tunnel, but in the darkness and confusion, he took the wrong turn into an unlit corridor. He groped his way forward, bumping into the walls, until he found some iron stairs leading up. He climbed, and at the top, a wooden door. He pushed it open and was blinded by sunlight. How was that possible? When he'd gone down, the sky over Nizhny Tagil was overcast with leaden clouds, and it was snowing. Yet here, the sun was shining like summer, the grass was green, and it was warm, like May. Cheerful music was playing. In the distance, groups of workers hurried along even though it was Sunday. Sergei Ivanovich, squinting, walked a few steps away. To the left, about 100 meters away, a workshop was visible. Above the door, a banner read, "We will fulfill the 7-year plan ahead of schedule." On top of a building, huge metal letters proclaimed, "Glory to the working man." To the right, an old crawler excavator was leveling a patch of ground. The mechanic approached to ask for directions. The young driver, dressed in light clothing, strange, since Sergei was wearing a heavy coat and wool hat, looked at him with bewilderment. "What do you want, old man?" Sergei asked for the vehicle repair workshop. The kid, confused, pointed toward the main entrance. No matter how much Sergei tried to explain it was a specific company, the young man didn't understand and looked at him with growing suspicion. Luckily, 2 men who looked like foremen walked by. Sergei asked them. At first, they didn't understand either, but one of them said, "You must be looking for the assembly workshop. I'll draw you a map." He took out a notepad and pencil, sketched a map with references to the tunnel, and handed it over. "Follow this. Take the 3rd passage." Sergei, though with the feeling they hadn't quite understood each other, took the paper, thanked them, and headed back toward the dark tunnel entrance. As he opened the door, he turned around. The 3 workers were still there, watching him with a mix of pity and suspicion. "They must think I'm crazy," he thought. He went back down into the darkness and, to his relief, quickly found the right exit. When he emerged, the cold and snow hit him again. No trace of sun or grass. When he told us this, the client and I laughed. "Ivanovich, you traveled to the past or a parallel world through that damn tunnel?" He smiled, but weakly. He looked genuinely unsettled. On the way back, we walked together through the same tunnel. Sergei tried to find the exit that had led him to that sunny world. We climbed several similar staircases, but none matched. We reached the entrance without success. As we said our goodbyes, Sergei pulled his hand out of his pocket to shake mine, and with it, a piece of paper fell to the ground. I picked it up. It was the map the foreman had drawn. We opened it. Arrows and circles scribbled in pencil, but what caught my attention was the header, printed in clear typeface. Nizhny Tagil Metallurgical Plant, Order of the Red Banner of Labor, 25 years. That night, at home, I opened an encyclopedia. The plant had been founded in 1940. The paper, according to the letterhead, was from 1965. My maternal grandfather never accepted Soviet power and didn't join the collective farm. After being unjustly stripped of his property, he supported his family by traveling from village to village with a sewing machine on his back, making warm clothing, sheepskin coats, leather jackets, caftans. He'd be hired for a week or 2 to fix everything that needed mending. In return, they'd give him food and some money. So my grandfather was often away from home. Sometimes he'd come back late, or at night, and if the weather caught him, he'd take shelter in haystacks or under a fir tree. His stories upon his return were always fascinating. One in particular I remember clearly. My grandfather was delayed in some far-off villages in Mariel, where he had many orders. When he finally set off, his hosts begged him to wait until dawn, but he refused. He was confident he'd make it home before dark. They paid him well, fed him, and at dusk, he started his journey back. It wasn't the first time he'd traveled those roads. He knew them like the back of his hand. It was late autumn. A light frost and wind had dried the mud, so he was walking at a good pace. But as twilight fell, when he looked around, he realized he was lost. The darkness was thickening, and in his search for familiar landmarks, he only found ravines, copses, and hollows. He'd been walking for a long time, maybe close to midnight. Suddenly, he saw a railway track beside him. That struck him as odd, because he knew there was no railroad for many miles around. In the distance, a light appeared, and soon a locomotive with several cars thundered past. When the train moved away, my grandfather, from experience, wanted to touch the rails to feel the heat from the passing train. But when he bent down, he only found dry grass. The rails had disappeared, as if they'd never existed. Fear washed over him. This is the devil's work. He prayed to escape that cursed place and started walking aimlessly. Soon he came to a wide, well-trodden dirt road. He stopped, unsure which way to go. Then he heard a creaking sound. Out of the darkness emerged the silhouette of a horse-drawn cart with several people on it. My grandfather couldn't make out their faces, but he crossed himself and asked them to stop, to tell him where they were coming from and where they were going so he could get his bearings. But the cart passed by without slowing down. It was then that he remembered what one should do in such cases. He turned his clothes and hat inside out and looked at the ground. There was no road. He was standing at the edge of a deep, steep ravine. One more step, and he would have tumbled into the void. Following the edge of the ravine, he reached his village only at dawn. And for a long time, he told the story of that night's journey. There's nothing more routine for a Muscovite than the metro. The only things that never cease to surprise are the ever-increasing fares and the half-hour delays caused by tunnel breakdowns. It's annoying, but it's still routine, and perhaps we should pay more attention to the mosaics with Soviet leaders and remember the era when the metro was built, an era full of secrets, like the one that happened in 1975, though it was nearly 20 years before one of those involved dared to tell a journalist. He was ordered to forget and keep quiet, but Viktor Stepanovich M. couldn't take it anymore and sent a letter to a major newspaper. The response was immediate. He ended up in the Koshchenko Psychiatric Hospital. He was released 6 months later after declaring himself mentally ill and that everything that had happened was a product of his insanity. What were the authorities trying to hide? This is what Viktor Stepanovich told the journalist. When I walked into the office of the head of the electric depot, my whole brigade was there. We're the ones who do the night rounds through the metro tunnels. Our stretch is the entire Circle Line. I know it well, and also the dead-end tunnels, the track branches, the civil defense storage facilities, and so on. When I heard what it was about, at first I didn't believe it. I thought it was a joke. Only the presence of 2 plainclothes men, silent, made me take the situation seriously. It turns out that the previous day, 24 hours earlier, a whole train with passengers and drivers had disappeared on the Circle Line, vanished. No one knew where. There was only one anomaly in the schedule. A train between Beloruskaya and Krasnopresnenskaya stations had taken 14 minutes, which was unheard of. That was the only stretch where it could have happened. There was a small dead-end branch there, but even if the switch had diverted the cars, the tunnel was too short for an entire train. Only 2 maintenance cars would fit. Where could the rest have gone? We arrived at the location in a maintenance car. It was 9 at night. Service was suspended. We went down, examined the tunnel, and ventured to the back wall. Nothing unusual. Suddenly, a dull rumble and a vibration beneath our feet. I didn't know if it was the drilling machines in the adjacent tunnel, when with a grinding sound, the switch changed position, and immediately the entire wall of the dead end began to rise. We were frozen by the sight. After a few seconds, we saw a large illuminated hall, like a metro station, with a single track where the missing train was sitting. The wall came back down. As if sprung, we rushed toward the closing opening. The wall sealed behind us and the lights went out. Only the dim emergency lights of the cars illuminated that sinister station. We approached the train, whispering. The first thing we saw was the last car, badly dented. The wall had caught it when it came down, but there was no one there. We shouted in the vast empty hall, but only the echo answered. The silence was terrifying. We searched every car. We found no one, but there were traces of occupation. Empty cans, a blanket on a seat where someone had slept. On the platform, a fire made from newspapers was extinguished, and a baby carriage with a pacifier. We were shaken. I personally was terrified. I suggested finding an exit, but there seemed to be none. We searched every corner, but no mechanism. An hour passed, maybe more. Suddenly the back wall rose again. The driver of the maintenance car appeared, shouting at us to get out of there fast. We barely made it to the car before the wall came down again, sealing off the mysterious station. The driver told us he'd found a rusty electrical panel in the tunnel wall, and by throwing all the switches, he'd managed to raise the wall. After that, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I figured the vibrations from construction in the adjacent tunnel had activated a contact in the forgotten panel, switching the points, and the automation did the rest. The train happened to pass at that moment and fell into the trap, but what I could never explain was, where did the passengers go? When I got out of Koshchenko, I went back to that tunnel. There was no moving wall, no dead end. It was all walled up and hidden under cables. The mystery remains unsolved. This one was told to me by my grandfather. It happened in the 1950s, in the port of Sovetskaya Gavan, in the Russian Far East. At that time, the city didn't even appear on maps, because it housed a military base and civilians weren't allowed in. The BAM, the Baikal-Amur main line, was under construction, and my grandfather, a conscript soldier, took part in building the Kuznetsovsk tunnel. The work was moving at breakneck speed. According to the plan, they'd excavate from both ends, and the two crews would meet in the center, in the heart of the Sikote-Alin mountain range. The work was grueling. In inhuman conditions, people were dying from the exertion, but construction continued. On July 4th, a group of 6 workers and 1 engineer entered the north portal of the tunnel to start their shift. At exactly 8 in the morning, a terrible roar was heard from inside. Everyone, including my grandfather, knew what had happened. A cave-in. The 7 men were buried alive. It was impossible to clear the entrance. The rock was too hard. No pickaxe could penetrate it. There was only one drilling machine at the southern end. It was decided to continue excavating from there until they found the bodies. Mourning was declared in the city, but many hoped the miners had survived in some cavity. The most optimistic estimates gave 3 weeks to reach them. 3 weeks of round-the-clock shift work. Finally, the rescuers reached the point of the collapse. Part of the tunnel hadn't caved in. In the light of the flashlights and shouts, a single man emerged. His clothes, his skin, his hair, everything was covered in blood. His eyes reflected absolute madness. For a minute, he stared at his rescuers and they at him. Then he fell to his knees and began rolling on the ground, howling like an animal, uttering meaningless words. They took him away. When the rescuers entered the section that hadn't collapsed, they found the bodies of the other 6 men. But they weren't bodies, they were bones, gnawed down to the white. In the appalling conditions of their confinement, the group had resorted to cannibalism. The survivor was institutionalized in a psychiatric hospital. When he woke up, the investigators asked him about his companions. He only replied, "The mountain spirit took them." He was accused of murder and cannibalism, but given his insanity, he wasn't tried. He was confined for life. Everything seemed clear. Until my grandfather, leaning toward my ear, whispered in a trembling voice, "6 robust men, about 700 kilos of meat, for 1 man in 3 weeks. Doesn't that seem like too much?" I don't usually believe in mysteries or supernatural forces, but that case made me doubt. When I was in 4th grade, we moved to a remote village with my mother, stepfather, and little sister. Our house was essentially in the middle of nowhere, right next to another house whose backyard opened onto a fast, wide, deep river. In summer, we'd walk a couple of kilometers to a calmer spot to swim. In winter, the river didn't freeze because the climate was tropical. The house was big, with 1 main bedroom, a large but empty kitchen, and between them, a small passage room where I slept. It had no doors, neither to the hallway nor to my parents' room. There was also a long, narrow hallway that wrapped around almost the entire house. While we lived there, I always felt a sense of unease, like someone was constantly watching me, in every room. But as soon as I stepped outside, the feeling disappeared. The wooden floor creaked, the stove crackled. Every sound made me more nervous. I never stayed home alone. If my mother went out to the garden, I'd run after her. We had a vegetable garden, but I didn't usually go there because there were lots of snakes. However, in one corner, flowers always grew, in any season, but I never went near it. The first strange thing happened when I was doing homework alone. My mother had gone to the summer kitchen, and my stepfather was at work. It was winter. Around 6 in the evening, it was already dark. Suddenly, I heard a demonic voice shouting incomprehensible phrases. I ran out. It turned out to be one of my sister's toys whose batteries had died and distorted the song. My mother calmed me down. "Yes, that happens, but the toy doesn't activate on its own. You had to press a button." The second incident was in summer. My mother went to the neighbor's house and I stayed behind. Suddenly, I was overcome by inexplicable anxiety, like something was about to happen. I went out to the garden, and as I was leaving, something made me look back. In the window, the curtain moved, and I saw an old man staring intently at me. I didn't know who he was, and I didn't tell anyone. The third case was the most terrifying. Months later, everyone was asleep. I was woken up by a boy about 7 years old, telling me I was sleeping in his bed. He was pale, with brown hair, wearing pajamas. He left a wet trail from the hallway. I jumped out of bed, went to my parents' room, looked at them, went back to my room, and the boy was gone. I didn't want to wake them. I stood there for a good while, and eventually I got back into bed. I never told anyone. We lived there for less than a year. We moved to be closer to doctors because my little sister started having epileptic seizures. In the 12 years that followed, she never had another one. Years later, my mother, who does believe in the supernatural, told me the story of the previous family. They had lived there and had a son who was friends with the neighbor girl. One day, while playing by the river, the boy slipped and fell into the water. The girl stood frozen, watching the current carry him away. When she finally went for help, it was too late. The family decided to bury him in their own garden. The soil, enriched by decomposition, was fertile, and flowers always grew there. My mother told me she also felt presences, and that she had even seen the old man, whom she called a domovoi, but never the boy.